Dr. Allison, my sister. Hello.
Hello.
We're going to end this running joke with this episode. This is like, I didn't record this. This is our second time doing it, and we just had a guest. So we're out of order. This is episode 33, but now it's like really 34 because we've done this twice. So hello.
Yes. Yes. And we clicked record.
We clicked record. I confirm it. It's happening.
Yeah, I see it happening.
Good job. I mean, it's only, as the Stoics say, this is only an opportunity to do what we did better.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
we're good.
And drop your knowledge of load management in arbitrary units and ratings of perceived exertion, what all these things mean to your patients. We talked about 2 episodes ago, and welcome in, everyone. We talked about 2 episodes ago, load management and what that means for the general population. We're not talking load management like the NBA, the NFL. We talked about that at length. About halfway through the episode, you dropped in these arbitrary units and working within both short-term stress and long-term stress while you're working out. And so you dropped in this metric that I wanted to go deeper on because I think it's a good concept for people to understand and maybe visualize, which we'll share actually some spreadsheet that I built for you in helping your patients log this, and you use it kind of ad hoc. But I think it's a cool little tool to show people how to, when we're talking load management, work in what you're calling the sweet spot of not overdoing it and not underdoing it. So we're going to get into that, but is there anything you kind of want to lead into this concept as we kind of talked about over the past couple episodes?
I think it's, this is probably the heart of most injuries, not always acute injuries, although it could be a factor, but the pains that creep up in our bodies, the more chronic, if you will, type issues that creep up. Tim Gabbett is really the one who kind of coined and talked through all this stuff. And the saying is, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the load you're not prepared for. So if you're not prepared to do something, then your body could respond with having injury or having pains. We give all sorts of examples. It could be painting your house, inside of your house that you haven't done, and suddenly your elbow is super sore for days or weeks because of this episode of painting your house. Well, when's the last time you moved that much? We think about it. The runners, I think about it the most. Doesn't mean they follow through all the time, but there's, runners are usually familiar with like a 10% rule. Like you only do a little bit more each week in order to build up your mileage. But there's also, that's true for anything. If you do a little bit more each week, you'll continue to build resiliency and robustness versus if you just try to jump in and jump out of heavy activities, you just risk the chance of something being hurt versus staying disciplined and constantly, upping the game with load.
This is something that you've taught me over the years, which is, and I think it makes sense once it's said aloud, but people don't think about it. It's like people understand going from 0 to 100 really fast and overdoing it, or maybe I've burnt myself out and that led to an injury because my muscles were fatigued and I wasn't loading in a proper way progressively. But on the flip side of that, an equal probability or even more so of injury exists if you're not doing anything and if you're not training, because then your muscles aren't even prepared at all. It's not because they're tired. It's because you haven't trained them for what you're doing every day, or what life might throw at you, which could be painting the house, could be mowing the lawn, could be moving furniture, which is an example we use all the time because that's a unique one that will pop up in somebody's life. Shoveling the driveway, all these things that pop up, if you're not training and you're not strengthening your body and keeping it up, that load that doesn't exist because you're not training leads you to the equal or higher probability of risk. So overdoing it when you're working out and underdoing it when you're not doing anything are both risks to leading somebody to see you as a patient, and finding what this sweet spot is can be from time to time maybe a little difficult for people in your practice or in general to conceptualize. So we're going to kind of talk about at a little bit more granular level this tool that you occasionally use with somebody to help it make click.
Yep. Yeah. The tool, like you said, is I sometimes rarely, and we'll say this again, I'm sure, rarely do I pull this up and pull the data, right? And like put the nitty gritty in. If
Yeah.
somebody's nitty gritty, I will pull it. And if I need to, right. And say like, okay, I want you to use this tool and plot for me the last 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or the upcoming 3 weeks, so we can get a sense of, are you overdoing it, underdoing it? Are you hitting the sweet spot or not?
Yep.
To your point, I think under preparation plagues us more than overuse.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you think about injuries, if you're listening to this, if you think about yourself, a lot of people will be like, oh, I overused something. It's an overuse injury.
Yeah.
Where, we're trying to change that tide and say, no, it's not an overuse injury. It's an underprepared situation.
I love that.
Where you weren't prepared for the load. My buddy Liebenson talks the most about it. It's just, if you want to build robustness in your life, like what are the things you want to do? Like to your point, like, there's things in life that will come at us. And sometimes we have to go beyond what we're ready for. And that is what it is.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody that likes to go, up here, we have a lot of people that go down to New York City Christmas time or visit family, and they haven't been moving at all or very little. And then they go walk for 2 days, 8 hours a day for the 2 days in a row.
20,000
And then
steps.
suddenly on Monday, they have knee pain and they're diagnosed with arthritis. And you're like, okay, it's and then it's a battle, like trying to pull that in. It's like the walking, the underpreparedness led you to aggravate your knee. And now we're going to put images to it rather than look at the story behind it.
Yeah. And it's stuff that can creep up on people too, right? Like people won't think, like people will go and walk New York City and they'll feel fine. And then it's 2 to 3 days later, something starts bugging them and they don't make that connection. So I think a tool like this and the examples that we went through last time that we'll do now that we're recording kind of highlights the examples of like how these things pop up, in life, and then conceptualize how you want to be training. Like you said, you don't use it a ton, but somebody like me, you said you will use it with somebody that's very analytical. Where the numbers
analytical or not grasping what I'm telling them. Like if I'm like beating home, like don't do this.
Yeah.
Then I will say, okay, give me these numbers, which will show you, and I'll show them the graph, or I'll show them the sweet spot, and then they're like, oh, okay, like now I get it.
And it's very interesting. We'll pull up the spreadsheet now, but it's interesting that you don't use this because we're in a time where people are taught to log their workouts and what percentage of their max they're working, or follow strict running programs. I love this spreadsheet because it balances the nitty gritty of tracking like every exercise you do down to like how many reps and sets you did versus like how much, what's the level of activity that I did overall in a week. And I can kind of over time see how that's progressing or how hard I'm working based on how I feel. And it gets people to think, and this will all make sense in a minute. It gets people like to be more intuitive with like, how does my body feel? What did I do this week? It just makes them more aware. And I love that. And, as I said before, there's almost nothing that happens in this world where I don't have a spreadsheet for. So it's like when I see something like this, I love spreadsheets, and you don't even want to know how many I have and for what reasons. And we might have a guy on later that focuses on data strategy for businesses, but over metricizing things in business and in healthcare has become like a major problem. Because people are managing the test or managing the metrics. We had Phil Ovadia talked about the 5 key things of metabolic health that are metrics that almost get ignored, and they're the most important ones because we're focused on a test result. So I love this one. Let's pull it up. Let's ground people in what it is and how they can use it. And we just use this, again, hopefully people can extrapolate it out to their lives, but this is just an example and people can hopefully see how they'd be able to use it for whatever they're doing.
Yep. Yeah, so as you're pulling it, I mean, one of the precursors is, when we look at activities, it's going to be very specific to your life, as we said. So, if you are super active and you're already, what you'll see on mats is running and boxing and weightlifting and all of that.
Yeah.
That is your life. You're not going to include your walk to work, or you're not going to include that because that's not really hitting you hard, versus if we have somebody who's just getting up from being stationary, that has been sedentary for months or years, walking to their car, it might be an activity for the day.
Yeah.
So again, this is very personal, and it is meant to be very global.
Yeah, I love macro trends as much as I love data, and I mentioned how much I love getting into the metrics. I love actually extrapolating it out to the 30,000-foot view, because I think that it makes the most sense to the most people, and you can kind of see where these trends are overall going. Then you can get into the weeds with you or your healthcare provider, your personal trainer, your financial specialist, whatever you're tracking it. If you're doing it at a macro level, then you can get under the hood and ask more meaningful questions versus starting so granular where you don't see the bigger picture.
Sure.
Okay.
Agreed.
So this is, again, I made this for you and your partners up in Suarez PT that you guys occasionally use when you need to make it click with a client. Here we have weekly activities. You see, I have the week number, the activity type that you did, RPE, which you'll explain, how many minutes you worked out, and then this fun thing in blue called AUs, which are arbitrary units. And then because I'm a psycho, I put in a section for notes in case anyone wanted to mention anything that they did here. As you mentioned, I'm a weightlifter. I do boxing on the side now. I'm a novice beginner, but I act like I'm a fucking tough guy. And then some running. And so I put in an example of 7 weeks in which I did these activities. And you can see halfway down in red, bolded, I added that I moved some furniture. So we can talk about that in context. But is anything right here now that you want to walk through real quick on this sheet and how it works?
Yep. So these would be, your major activities of the week. Again, individual to you. For sake of the spreadsheet, the week number, you just define if that's Sunday to Monday or whatever it is, or Monday to Sunday. And that just makes things talk in the next sheets.
Sure.
Your activity is, again, however you want to break it down. If it's a gym session and included weightlifting and running, that's fine too. This is like your activities you did. Then RP, which you alluded to, is called the rating of perceived exertion. So that's a 0 to 10 scale. 0 being I'm not doing anything at all, exerting no energy, and 10 being like this is the hardest thing I can possibly do. So, and that is global for that activity. So, your run, you might start with a nice easy run. You might hit it hard for a mile and then you back it down for a mile. It's the average of the time spent.
Yeah.
For the purpose of this right now.
Yeah. In that example, I did 30 minutes of running and I said it's a 7. That is how I felt after the 30 minutes. It wasn't like, man, I really hit it hard. Thing. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Or like the hardest that it was in there. No, it's the global average of that time.
Yep.
Total minutes is what it is. That's the amount of time you spent doing that. And then the AUs essentially is just RPE times minutes. And it's just a way to compare apples to apples with activities.
Yeah.
How hard was it to your body for how long?
Yeah.
That's all it is.
I always think of these as just creating it's cool. It's very cool. Like in sports, again, I've been in analytics my whole life. They kind of create these stats that on themselves don't mean anything, but they use them to create a baseline. So you could think about it as like a cost of living index, I think. Like these are kind of building blocks. Like if you see like the best places to live economically in the country, they'll use New York City as the baseline. And then everything is indexed over or below that. So this is a good one where as your rating of perceived exertion, which is personal to you, these AUs are called arbitrary units. They're arbitrary to you. So what
are they? They're arbitrary units. It's a product of 2 numbers.
That's
all it is.
Yeah. It's a number for you to then compare week to week what that number is.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I love that. Okay. So as you see, I have everything in here. You would input everything in yellow. This blue number calculates 6 times 45 equals 270. That 270, as we just mentioned, means very little, except in context to the rest of these.
Right.
So
let me talk to like the moved furniture that you plugged in there.
Yep.
The reason this whole conversation we started was we were talking about load, and then I was talking about a woman who was perfectly, beautifully training for a marathon.
Yes.
And about 3 weeks before her marathon, she was developing Achilles issues.
Yes.
And we came to find out she was doing all the things. She was tapering. She was doing everything right.
Right to a T.
To a T.
Yeah.
Except that that week was when it was changing weather up here, and they were bringing her dock out of the lake, and she had to carry her dock with her husband up a large hill so in the water, standing in the water, lifting this, moving it, pulling it, and then this pretty big trek up a long hill, which required her to push off her toe way more than she was doing.
Yep.
And thus born some Achilles issues.
Yeah.
So for her, that activity that was very strenuous to her body was meaningful in her load management scenario.
Yeah, it affected the rest of her training because it was a load she had not been prepared for and wasn't typically training for. So this is important too. One more caveat is, on here, I don't have vacuuming the house, dusting, painting. Like if those are things that are generally that you do, you've mentioned this to me before, that are kind of like activities of daily living. It's you said 0 to 10. Those are zeros to me, who's
correct,
fit and strong, and I don't even feel those things when I do them, right? But correct. If you are someone who has had a series of issues or has pain doing certain things and doing these types of activities do put a strain on you, you might want to consider logging those things.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. So that's cool. So every week you can see I weightlifted, ran, and boxed. I think these numbers now in blue, where I have the week separated by this little line, they add up to how much I did in that week. And then we're going to compare those week over week to see what I was doing, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over the working chart that we went through last week and just go right to the bar chart.
See, that's why we did a practice run.
That's why we did the practice run. Okay, so here are the results of me entering this data, right?
Yes.
Go through what you see here.
So,
go ahead, Doc.
So, so the blue line, so we didn't identify this. Well, we started talking about it, but when we're looking at workload management, you have acute stress, which is the stress you provided on your body for a week, is how we're defining it for this.
Yes. And
chronic stress is the cumulative stress over X amount of weeks. I like to at least have 4 weeks of data in the ideal world. 6, the more weeks are under our belt, the more we understand it.
Yeah.
So the blue columns represent the acute stress, the amount of work your body did that week.
Yes.
And the orange line represents chronic stress, which is the average of these weeks to week.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So as we look through these, what the goal is those blue lines you want for that ratio. So the sweet spot, which we'll talk about in the next chart, but the sweet spot is that the ratio, come on.
You're good.
Sweet spot is that the ratio between the two lines is 0.8 to 1.2.
Yep.
So that ratio between acute to chronic work stress is either a little bit lower or a little bit higher than the previous week.
So in this example, as you can see, in week 1, I did 930 units. Week 2, 975. Week 3, 1185. And I'll just stop there. And you can see that in the orange line, the average of those weeks, as I've gone up, the rolling average of those is now at week 3, 1030. You're telling me, so the 1030, the 1030 is my chronic stress. That's how hard I've been working over time. 1185, that third week, that's how hard I worked that week. When you divide that 1185 by 1030, you get a ratio, and you want that ratio to be between 0.8 and 1.3.
Correct.
Which we'll visualize in a minute.
That's the sweet spot, which we'll see in the next one. So So in the ideal world, when you look at these columns, there really shouldn't be much change from week to week in the columns, right? So as you're going through, like what would stand out to me immediately is obviously this one week of this big stress. And then all of a sudden we dumped down way lower than the chronic stress. And, so we're going way high, way low. And that's a flag of a potential time for injuries to occur. Okay.
Yep.
So when I look at this, the ideal scenario is to see like little baby steps, maybe a little up, maybe a little down.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean, when we keep plotting points, like if we were to plot, 8, 9, 10 weeks, that blue line should progressively get higher if that's what you're looking for. Yep. Right. If you're looking to build your robustness, if you will, you want that blue line to continue to get higher. So things like daily chores or walking or going to Manhattan walking for 4 hours aren't a huge increase in activity because they're not for you. Right. So that's what you're looking at here. So when I see this, the ideal scenario is that it's a nice, maybe a very slow trend
uptick. Yep.
Very slow uptick. When you start to see the blue lines way high and way low compared to the orange line, now we're getting into what we call a boom and bust mentality. We do a lot. And who knows, why did you go down that next week? Did you hurt something? Were you sore? Did you go on vacation? So there's different reasons that you can go low. But then it's more about equalizing that stress quicker. One more point to that is like, the big line to the low line, like a lot of times you'll see this with kids who are coming back from injuries or people who are coming back from an injury. It doesn't have to be kids, but you see it all the time is that they get hurt and they're down at like 770 because they like did something. And then everybody, docs, PT, everybody rest, coaches, just rest, don't do anything, rest your ankle, let it heal. And then the following week or 2 weeks later, they go and they're back up at 2000, up in the 2000s of these AUs and they hurt something else or they re-sprain their ankle or they, suddenly, oh my God, what bad luck. I suddenly got a knee injury. And, so now you're seeing what the why behind these things. That is that they're not prepared and or overloading. And that is like this yo-yo effect that just keeps happening because now they hurt again. Now they're out again. Then they go back and they hurt again. They're out again. And you keep seeing the trends go up and down versus this nice, slow build back.
This is something that really frustrates you with the youth population and how we treat them coming back from injury. And I think you mentioned before when we were chatting, that you saw a ton of these big spikes when everyone returned to school from COVID, right? Because everyone was at home and actually it was kind of, you would think, well, everyone should have been focusing on health and wellness and getting out and moving during that time. We weren't. We just locked ourselves in, went back to school.
And kids, even if they weren't working as hard as they would with a team. They weren't cutting. They weren't like going as hard for so many hours. And then when they started back to school, and this is actually true in the NFL too.
I was just going to say,
when they started back to play, it wasn't even just kids, but when they started back to play, it was like, oh my God, now we got to get all the practices and all the games in. We have to do this. I have this girl right now. She's just turned 16, so but she sprained her ankle in like November, and then came back too early, sprained the other ankle, and then came back and then sprained her first ankle again. And so this time going through, we really focused on fitness and getting her back. And sure, we did a lot of ankle stuff, but we were really focused on, managing her load, to the point where, her mom called me. She's like, all right, when is she going to play? I'm like, well, has she practiced? Okay. She's been practicing. Okay. Has she scrimmaged? Okay. I just released her to scrimmaging. Has she been doing this? And so every week we added an activity in her practice that increased her load. And now she's back and we're limiting minutes. So that's why minutes get limited. Like NBA is very, notorious for this. Like somebody's limiting their minutes. That's because we're starting to manage their load back. So, and then you at that level, right? So practice might be a 6, a game is an 8. So, this is the backbone behind those conversations. So I want somebody chomping at the bit, right, ready to get back. And there's a fine line, but I don't want this girl spraining her ankle again. I don't want her in what we call rehab purgatory. I want her to get back and be back. And I don't want her to get hurt again. So this is how we do it. And this is the way. And I want you chomping at the bit. So your confidence is high and all the things. So, so we got rid of that boom and bust for her and made sure training was at the level of participation And then when we got back to participation, then load the participation in that chart should be a nice, smooth return.
Yeah. So I think what you see a lot with both, and then, so that's a great example with people that are active, but you clearly see it with people coming back from New Year's resolutions, or those that are just trying to lose weight and get exercising for the first time in their lives. They go just so hard because they're so motivated to get back into doing something, and then they get hurt, and then you see this big spike where I have the 2070, and then they get hurt and they take a rest, and then they're not doing anything. They're trying to get back into it, and then they start feeling a little bit better, and they go way up again, and then they hurt again, and then they're out again, and then they ride this roller coaster. And it's why people ride the roller coaster of fad diets and all this stuff, because there's not that consistent build, there's not that habit building. So this is
because you can maintain, you can be injured and maintain a high activity level often, not always, right? But if you hurt your shoulder, go get on a bike, go get on a stationary bike, go do something that at least is maintaining fitness levels.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to have to load the shoulder then appropriately.
Yes.
But in the meantime, maintain your fitness so you don't lose that, because now if you go deeper in other categories of your body, it's going to be harder to dig out and longer to dig out.
Yep. Okay, so this is a cool chart. Again, the blue is what I'm doing every week. The orange is the average of that week and all the prior weeks. So you want that ratio to be between 0.8 and 1.3. And I think we can go to the next chart to show what that looks like, right?
Yep.
All right. So here you go.
Okay. So this is taking the acute stress, dividing it by the chronic stress, and then settling where the sweet spot is.
Yep.
So this chart just gives people a sense of if they've been overloading or underloading based on what their cumulative chronic stress is. Yep. Plotting those points out. If it's green, it's in the sweet spot. It's in that
between those dotted lines. Yeah.
In between the dotted lines. Matt has nicely made it with his spreadsheet geekiness to turn green when it's in between them and red when it's outside of them. So great job. No, it's very pretty and I love it. So when you see this next, we put it at 1.3. Yeah, we put the metric at 1.3, which is correct. So 0.0 or 0.8 to 1.2, 1.3 of that acute to chronic workload stress ratio. If it's in the sweet spot, it will be green. If it's out of it, it will be red. Obviously, the goal is to maintain it in the green. So if you do a little bit more on a week, then you do a little bit less the next week, and you can maintain. Keep climbing up. It's more so taking breaks or doing stuff really high level that gets us in more trouble.
And so this is cool for, again, the novice or somebody like me. It's like, okay, I see that red spike and that big one right there, and that was me moving furniture. So I couldn't control that for the most part, unless I planned for my week and knew that was going to be a big test. But let's just say it came out of nowhere. So when I'm plotting this, the next week, going below is actually just as bad as and I'm using bad loosely. I know we don't like good and bad here, but it's just as bad as that spike at the top. So what you're saying is like, all right, you went way over. So now your rolling average over 4 weeks has now spiked, right? Because you did a lot of activity. You can still get into the green, even though if you're hurt, even though you overdid it the following week by taking your foot off the gas a little bit. But you can do it smarter versus what this chart nicely calls out is, well, you just shut it down. You just rest. You just did nothing in preparation for that. And now when you start going back up, you've kind of put yourself at risk for doing something second and third hand down the road. Right.
So I think, I mean, and we can put this in so many categories, right? It does, it doesn't mean there can't be one outlier. What it does mean, if there's if there's an overloaded week and something hurts you, like don't jump to a knee replacement because one week you went crazy and your knee hurts now. Like you overloaded those tissues. Now we got to calm them. The whole lovely saying of calm shit down before you build shit up. Like now you just have to calm it down before you build it. But like these to me are also people who whatever, they did everything in their spike is they did everything in their house and around the yard before they went on vacation. Then they went on vacation and they didn't do anything, not because they weren't sore, but they just didn't do anything for 2 weeks because they were traveling and they were moving.
Sat on the beach. They were poolside.
Sat on the beach, charge, which is great, right? Which is good to do.
Yeah.
But then, then the next week they got home and maybe they didn't, I wouldn't even put them in green yet. They got home, but they had to stabilize. Kids get back to school. Everything happens.
Right.
And now they're ready to go. And they just go back to HIIT classes 5 days a week.
Right.
Boom, spike. Right.
Yeah.
My shoulder hurts, but they say, fuck it. I'm just going to keep going. HIIT classes for 3 weeks, well above that average.
Yeah.
Now their shoulder really hurts.
Yeah.
Now they're into CT, and then we're like, all right, well, what are you doing for activity? Nothing. I shut it down. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
Now they're back underneath, and so the first move is to get them doing something that's getting their body moving in the sweet spot.
Yep. So how do you get
that? Could be walking, could be anything, like just get going, do something.
Yep. So I love this. It's very high level. It kind of shows like, all right, if there's going to be periods in life where intensity wrap up or whatever, you go on vacation and periods of low intensity present themselves and you just don't do anything. Happens to me all the time. Right. So it's just like, you do have the boom and bust of what life throws at you. So how do you get somebody like I can see why, like, you don't want to overthink this. So you don't want somebody just like maybe who's an overthinker or overcritical or over analytical using this and then just like thinking about every move. Your goal, as you've done with me when you're cueing people just to do exercises, is to not think, right? It's to move naturally. It's to, make sure that you're challenging yourself and be aware, but not thinking like, okay, should I do that? Should I do this? You should be kind of going intuitively, but you want to be aware of these things. So how do you get to somebody not overthinking? It's just like, oh, geez, I moved this week. So where's that right balance to make sure I stay above that low dotted line? Where I just had a period of high activity. I know I need to take my foot off the gas, but taking my foot off the gas doesn't mean do anything. Again, the sweet spot is a very nuanced thing in life when you're debating complex topics or here it's like, okay, you need to keep your body prepared. You need to keep doing things, even if you've overstressed it. So how do you get people like not to overthink there? And I think that would be a good way to kind of bang home everything we're driving here.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is to, like anything else, just identify that it's happening, right? Like identify the fact that you're overdoing, underdoing, and you're not consistent with activity level. Like number one is identify that.
Yeah.
If somebody really needs a visual, that is where I pull this out. Right. Again, I don't find I have to do that well. Sometimes I just draw it on the board in here and just say, this is what your activity looks like. This is what we need it to look like. It doesn't mean when you go on vacation, you can't have, time to just veg and not work out and not do things like that's okay. Like that's great for you. It's needed for you. But when you come back, like when you go back to your classes, maybe it's lesser weight, maybe if the class has 3 sets of 15 on the board, you're doing 3 sets of 8 with a medium weight and not worrying about somebody in your face, rah, get it. Come on, go hard. Like you're not there yet. Right. Yep. So I think it's that individualism. I think it's that humbleness of like, oh, I was off and now I just need to kind of work myself back a couple weeks before I'm back at my peak. And then I'll be at my peak or even higher because I did take time to recharge, but I built myself back, so be at 1.2 of that ratio for 3 weeks. On the high end of it, but don't go crazy.
Yeah.
So, that's more the education is like when you get back into something, like when you haven't done it, just don't go balls to the wall. Like start simple, make sure you feel good, make sure you feel energized, and then progress it back over a couple of weeks.
Do you follow David Goggins?
I know him, but I don't follow him.
He's a fucking psycho. I'd be so curious to see, like, he runs like ultra marathons, but like he'll just bang out. Like today, he probably did 35 miles.
Right.
And like he's one of these influencers, a Navy SEAL, just hard dude, very inspirational guy. Lost a ton of weight. He went through a knee surgery. He just posted something about like some guys wanting to been challenging him to go out for a run, and like they're younger guys and they're in good shape. And they're like, how long are we running? And he's like, how long are we running? They're like, however long you want, buddy. He's like, all right, I got you. Because they saw him kind of like limping because he had this knee surgery. Like they didn't know that like, he just will go forever. And then like around mile 20, 25, they all just like started tapering off. And then he did like a video at like mile 30 and it's just him running. He's like, look behind me. There's fucking no one. I'd love to see like somebody like that where like he's promoting fucking go hard, just like me, dude. It's just like box, go hard, challenge yourself. But you can still do that and live in this range is the whole point here. So
the point of going that hard is what is your lifetime then?
Correct.
Right?
Like, that's where the build. That's the build, right?
Correct.
Like if blue
lines, you've been building this appropriately over years and years. And I'm not saying you can't do it within a few years, but like if I set out today and said, I'm going to do an ultra marathon, which is 100 miles or more, it's going to take, to do it right without injuries, it would take me a year to 2 years to get there. Because there will be hiccups. There will be something. I will hit a weird terrain. I will do something and, something will happen and we got to make sure we're adjusting to that. I have a colleague that works down the hall that is an ultra marathoner and it just is the same, but he's constantly working appropriately at things all the time. It's just this build and build. You can't take away that build. You can't make up that build. You can always improve and get better. But if you're going against somebody that's been building for 20 years appropriately with a solid base, that hasn't been injured and hasn't been out, right? Like we talk about that in sports. The best way to excel in a sport is to stay on the goddamn field, right? Like
what do they say? The best ability is availability.
Yeah, there you go. I love it.
Yeah.
So if you're not able to be there, like these kids that get hurt like in high school because they're overdoing it, if they're hurt all the time and out all the time, like you're not going to go to the showcases to get noticed to get to college because you're out. Don't get out and then we'll be good.
So I just wanted to bring him up because I think he's somebody with a huge following on social who's super into fitness and he's all about like go hard, go, no prisoner, take, fucking let's go. But he earned that right. I bet if you followed him over the years, though, these blue bars of his are very consistent. And he's earned the right to keep living at that thing where he can go run 20 miles a day. He really can. And he's a freak and he's an outlier, but people always like to argue at those edge cases and those outliers. And I you got to understand, even for him, so his cost of living index, his benchmark, his blue bars here are just higher than mine. They're just higher than mine and yours. And they're probably all in the green, where for us, I would have to make a chart that wouldn't fit on the screen and they'd all be in red if we even did 20% of what he's doing. So, and
you're driving your point home, but the interesting is the AUs might look the same as yours, but his RPEs for the activities are higher and lower, right?
So he goes for a
AUs normalize this.
He goes for a 30-mile run. He's like, that was a 5.
Right.
And, whatever.
Exactly.
And he did it.
So the AUs normalize the bar graph, but if you look at the total work, his total work, which is a different calculation.
And again, I think people should go back and listen to the episode a couple of times. Like here, like these arbitrary units, they're to you. So like David Goggins going for a 30-mile run might put that at a 3 and get to 200 and for however many minutes and get to around 270, 300 AUs where I'm lifting hard for here and I'm at the same. So it's specific to you. You're tracking it here. This shows your over time how you're doing. And then this just shows you like where you might want to keep the pedal down and where you want to be mindful of maybe just, easing back into things based on whatever life threw at you.
You got it. Yep.
I love it. I think that's a cool walkthrough.
Yeah, good.
What else?
So it gives you, and we did in our previous recording talk about these kind of calculations, not necessarily this one in general, but is likely at the heart of like your wearable device.
Yeah.
Right.
Your
Like Oura
Fitbits.
Ring or Garmin's, like if you have a running program on there, they'll measure your stats and say, oh, you need to be higher with this. Oh, you should take a rest day. Like it will calculate this out and tell you this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of taking this data, I'm sure, way to a deeper level, way more knowledge behind it, way more data points, but it's taking it and saying, like, how is your body responding to the activity you're doing, and where is your sweet spot? And then it's trying to push you into that sweet spot a little higher, a little rest day, and it's trying to guide you on that.
The one thing with the Oura Rings and those things is like they hit you with that alert, and you might not see the why under it though, like it and all so this dumbs that down, again, very macro, dumbs it down to really how you're feeling and intuitive. So you might see if you use this tool ever that I would happily DM or share this with anyone that wants it so they can reach out. But if when you see that red spike, if you're doing it right and you're really being honest with how you're feeling, you might get that warning on that day that you were overdoing it when you see big spikes or that red, or it'd be like, hey, did you think about taking a walk today, you lazy piece of shit? Because so
like the Fitbit, like one of my friends has the Fitbit, and she'll share like her body battery with me. My body. And so if you did all this stuff, it might tell you your battery's low, and then you need some time to recover. It gives her like, it's going to take you X amount of time to recover from that. So again, this is a very, very basic understanding behind those data points, like in that stuff. So.
I love it. Okay, so there you go. Okay. There's the follow-up. Part 2, load management, arbitrary units. Be conscious, be aware, built on developing yourself. Like and subscribe, people. Let's go. See you on the next one.
Peace out.
Peace.